Have you ever sat in stillness, taking a slow breath, and quietly wondered, is this when my body starts to leave me behind? A 74-year-old man once said, I thought I was just a little tired until the day I couldn't climb 3 steps. No alarm bells, no sharp pain. Just one day, everything felt different. And those small changes, if we don't pause and listen, can quietly guide us toward a turning point we never saw coming. If these words made you stop for just a moment, you're warmly invited to subscribe to the channel and leave a simple comment below, like a quiet mark in the sand. I'm still here, ready to listen to my body. I used to be strong. I used to feel like myself. It was a morning like any other. Mr. Raymond, 78 years old, sat by the window, a cup of tea in hand, soft sunlight filtering through the leaves. A small radio played an old symphony, the kind he always turned on while making his morning tea. A faint scent of mint drifted through the air. And in that quiet moment, he felt like he was going back. Back to the days when a simple twist of the waist meant his legs would carry him as swiftly as the wind. Back to those mornings he got ready for work, brushing his teeth while his little daughter called out from the hallway, Dad, what color tie are you wearing today? Back to a feeling he never thought to name, but now realizes was priceless, the feeling that his body was a trusted friend. Back then, he didn't need sticky notes to remember what to do. He didn't need to grip the armrest just to rise from a chair. He didn't need to pause halfway up the stairs to catch his breath. He lived in his body the way one lives in a well-lit home. Steady, warm, safe. And then, things changed. Not with a fall, not with a sudden trip to the ER, but through small shifts, quiet as smoke. A morning when sleep came harder than usual. A moment when a brisk walk made his heart pound like a marathon. An afternoon when he looked at the clock 3 times and still couldn't remember what he meant to do. He told himself it was just age, but somewhere deep inside something felt unsettled. He still woke up early, still made his tea, still turned on the radio, but with every passing morning, he felt just a little less like himself. And what shook him the most wasn't the sore knees or the blurred vision. It was the quiet realization that he was no longer certain he understood his own body. There were times he told himself, maybe it's just a phase. But this morning when he dropped his teacup and had to bend down slowly, hands slightly trembling, he finally saw it clearly. It wasn't his body that had left him behind. It was him who had stopped listening. Dear friend, have you ever felt something like that? A moment so gentle, so brief, yet powerful enough to make you pause, breathe slower, and quietly ask yourself, am I living with my body or merely through it? If so, then this video is for you. Not to bring fear, but to help you remember you once felt deeply alive, and you still can be, in a new way, fuller, softer, and just as real. If this part touched something in you, you're warmly invited to leave a quiet comment, like a personal reminder. I'm still here and I'm listening to myself. I just thought, maybe it's just because I'm getting old. Since that morning he dropped the teacup, Mr. Raymond began to notice things. He was forgetting more often, but not the usual kind of forgetfulness. One day he walked into the kitchen to get his water bottle, but halfway across the room he suddenly froze. Wait, what was I here for? Just a few seconds, but it left him uneasy. He laughed it off, then reassured himself. Maybe my mind just wandered a bit. The next morning while making tea, he accidentally grabbed 2 tea bags instead of 1. And the strange thing was, he didn't notice until the first sip. The flavor was different, strong, sharp, a little bitter. He stared at the cup in his hands, paused for a moment, then smiled softly, as if brushing away something he wasn't ready to face. Across town, Mrs. Eleanor, 76 years old, still kept her morning ritual, walking slow circles around her garden. But lately she'd been running out of breath after just a few laps. It wasn't the cold, it wasn't the slope, it was just, her breath didn't seem to stretch as far as it used to. She didn't tell anyone, because she thought, I'm old. Getting tired is just normal. But deep inside, something began to fracture. not in her lungs, not in her legs, but in the quiet belief that this body was still fully hers. Elsewhere, Mr. Samuel, a retired mechanic, 75, still walked into his old garage every morning, polishing the same car he hadn't driven in years. He'd say, "Just seeing it shine makes me happy." But lately, just crouching down to clean the tires made him dizzy. He'd stand up, coughing, a dry, short cough, followed by a tightness in his chest. He took a sip of water, then told his wife, "Probably just the dust." I used to weld for hours and never had an issue, but his wife, Susan, said nothing. She'd heard the softer breaths at night, and she'd seen that he was slowly stepping away from the things he once did without a second thought. Irregular heartbeat, shallow breathing, bruises that took too long to fade. A morning trip to the market, cut short because he forgot his wallet. None of these things were big enough to cause alarm, but neither were they small enough to ignore. The real issue wasn't the symptoms themselves, it was the way we name them. When we say it's just aging, we're also quietly telling ourselves it's not worth paying attention to. And that, right there, is when we begin to lose something sacred. The act of listening to our bodies, the trust in the signals we feel inside, the choice to stay engaged instead of drifting into surrender. Dear friend, if anything in these words made you nod, even just a little, please leave a comment as a quiet vow to yourself. I won't ignore it anymore, because sometimes what we call small is actually the first doorway to returning to life, to ourselves. I'm fine. It's probably nothing. People often think that when the body begins to change, we'll notice it right away. But the truth is, we quietly resist, not the illness itself, but the act of admitting that we may need a little care. Mr. Samuel, 75, declined his routine checkup for the first time. The doctor called to remind him. He replied briefly, "I feel normal," then hung up, coughed, and glanced over at his wife, who was peeling apples. "It's just the cold," he said. "I opened the door too early this morning." That cough had been around for more than 2 months. Still, he brewed his tea each morning, still polished his car every afternoon, still said, "It's nothing." I worked in a machine shop, way dustier than this. Inside him, there was a quiet struggle between admitting he was slowing down and holding on to the pride of someone who had always been strong. Thomas, a 70-year-old former firefighter, had once charged into burning buildings. He trusted his body, always had. Even when the doctor warned him about high blood pressure, he just smiled. "I like salty food. It's just a treat now and then." Then one morning, while making coffee, his hand slipped. The cup shattered on the floor. His wife saw his pale face, lips trembling. But all he said was, "Didn't sleep well. Probably stayed up too late watching the game." He knew that wasn't the reason, but he was afraid. Afraid that if he admitted the truth, he'd no longer be the pillar of the family. Afraid that if he asked someone to drive him to the clinic, he'd be seen as dependent. And that fear, the one called, "I'm not who I used to be," was stronger than the pain itself. Raymond, the man who often read by the window, had started hiding his forgetfulness. He forgot to turn off the stove, forgot his son's phone number. One afternoon, he told the same story 3 times over a single cup of tea. When his daughter gently touched his hand and said, "Dad, you already told us that one," he just smiled and kept telling it anyway. Because stopping meant facing the one question he feared most. Am I starting to forget who I am? You see, refusal doesn't always live in actions. Sometimes it lives quietly in the heart, a deep, quiet pride that can so easily become a wall. Older adults don't say no because they're stubborn. They say no because they were once strong. And deep inside, they still want to believe, "I'm still strong enough to carry this on my own." Dear friend, if you've ever hidden a wave of fatigue, if you've ever said it's nothing just to avoid troubling your children, then know this: that isn't weakness. It's a kind of loneliness that simply hasn't been named. If you can, leave a quiet comment below. I once said I'm fine, but now I want to listen to myself. Because real courage isn't about staying silent or carrying it all. Real courage is the quiet strength to admit, I need to be understood. I deserve to be cared for. I can't keep pretending anymore. That morning, a light drizzle blurred the sky. Mr. Raymond woke earlier than usual, startled by a sudden, erratic heartbeat in the middle of the night. He sat on the edge of his bed, one hand resting on his chest. There was no pain, just something unfamiliar. He walked into the bathroom, planning to shave like he did every morning. But when he looked into the mirror, he couldn't remember. What had he come here to do? He stood still. Was it shaving, brushing his teeth, or something else? A blankness swept through his mind, and for the first time in years, he didn't look at his reflection to check his beard or his hair. He looked quietly, deeply, and asked himself a harder question. How far have I drifted from my own body? Elsewhere, Mrs. Eleanor sat quietly in the living room, waiting for her daughter to pick her up for their usual grocery run. On the table was a handwritten list, but something felt off. Why had she written almond milk instead of cow's milk like she always did? A small change, but it left her unsettled. When her daughter walked in and glanced at the note, she said softly, "You wrote that last week, Mom?" Eleanor looked down. Same handwriting, paper already yellowed, and she had nothing left to say. In that moment, no one raised their voice, no panic. But inside her, a silence deeper than words. For Mr. Thomas, the sacred moment came on a day that seemed ordinary. He went out to the garden to pick some tomatoes. But as he stepped onto the porch, his hand missed the railing. Just a brief stumble, but enough to send the basket tumbling to the ground. He sat down, breathing heavily, palms scraped, and the tears that followed weren't from pain, but from the sudden, undeniable weight of helplessness. His son came running, gently helping him to his feet, and for the first time, he didn't say the usual, "I'm fine." He just held his son's hand, quietly, tightly, like a child who'd just been found after getting lost. Dear friend, sometimes the sacred moment doesn't arrive as a crisis. It comes in the quiet collapse, when we simply can't pretend anymore. When we forget something we've always remembered. When our hands tremble and we no longer lie, just tired today. When someone looks at us and we know they've seen the truth we've tried to hide, that is the moment we can no longer look away. Not to be afraid, but to finally see. To truly see our body, our aging, ourselves. If you've ever had a moment that made you stop, not from pain, but because you simply couldn't brush it aside anymore, you are invited to leave a comment below, a quiet, honest note to yourself. I'm listening. Because the moment we dare to face it, without turning away, without putting on a brave face, that's when the real door to life begins to open. I accept that I need to change. After that morning when he couldn't remember why he was standing in front of the mirror, Mr. Raymond stopped making tea the way he used to. That day, he simply poured boiling water into a cup, then left it to cool on the table. He sat in silence, watching his hands tremble slightly. He didn't complain. He wasn't sad, but something undeniably true was unfolding inside him. The shell of "I'm still fine" had quietly fallen apart. Mrs. Eleanor no longer went to the supermarket alone, but instead of hiding her worry, she gently spoke to her daughter. "Can you check these notes for me? I'm not sure I remember everything correctly anymore." Her daughter looked up, surprised for a moment, then smiled. No one said, "You're getting weak." It was simply that she no longer had to hide. That night, she pulled out a small notebook and began writing down the things she wanted to remember. Each letter, slow but steady, as if every stroke of the pen was a step toward herself again. Mr. Thomas, after the fall on the porch steps, finally agreed to visit the doctor with his son. Not because anyone forced him, but because for the first time, he wanted to understand what was truly happening in his body, instead of guessing. He sat in the exam room, listening to the words, high blood pressure, risk of stroke, and instead of shutting down, he asked, "Is there anything I can do to make it better?" The doctor replied, "Just be consistent. Even a 15-minute walk each day makes a difference." And so he began. 2 slow laps around the garden every morning. His hands still shook. His breath was still short, but his eyes shone a little brighter. Rebirth doesn't come in a single night. It's not like the movies, where the hero wakes up and turns a whole new page. Rebirth, sometimes, is a 78-year-old man checking his blood pressure each morning, a 76-year-old woman labeling her spice jars so she won't have to ask for help, choosing less salt, even when the old dish still calls her name. These things won't make headlines. No one will applaud them, but they are quiet proof that older adults are not helpless. They're simply learning how to live again in a new way. Dear friend, no one else can live your life for you. No doctor is wise enough if you choose to remain silent, but you don't have to overhaul your entire life. Just one step, one small act, done with awareness. For example, write down moments of unusual fatigue, check your blood pressure weekly, or simply ask your child, do you think I should see a doctor? Because the moment we ask is the moment we open a door, and the moment we accept, a part of us already begins to step out of the dark. If you've ever quietly started over, if you've ever labeled the salt jar or reached for fruit instead of sweets, please leave a comment below this video. I'm learning to live again, my own way. No one else may know, but we do, and we understand. It may be the bravest journey of your life. I'm still here, and I can live differently. That day, Mr. Raymond sat again at the familiar table, the same spot where he used to drink tea each morning. But this time, there was no teacup, just a notebook, and the blood pressure monitor his son had brought him last week. He wrapped the cuff around his arm, pressed the button, and waited. Blood pressure, a bit high, but that was all right, because he had recorded it, and inside, instead of fear, he felt calm. For the first time in months, he felt like he was back at the wheel of his own life, not to control everything, but to understand himself a little more each day. Mrs. Eleanor was preparing lunch with her granddaughter. She no longer cooked alone, but she still chose the dishes, guided the steps, and added her signature seasonings. Her 16-year-old granddaughter asked, "Why don't you use iodized salt like we do at home?" Eleanor smiled. "Because my doctor asked me to adjust my taste a little. Not because I'm weak, but because I want to keep cooking for many more years." It sounded like a simple reply, but for her it was a quiet declaration. She wasn't resenting her body. She wasn't trying to rewind time. She was beginning to love it, just as it is today. Thomas, after a few weeks of walking, had grown used to the slope in his garden. Each morning he put on headphones, played a soft classical tune, and walked slowly, step by step. One morning it drizzled lightly. He still put on his windbreaker, pulled up his hood, and completed his laps. He no longer said, "I want to be strong like before." He simply said, "I want to stay strong so I can visit my friends on my own without troubling anyone." One afternoon, he picked up the phone and called his old friend George, 3 years older, living alone in a nearby town. The call lasted 43 minutes. They told stories, laughed, and promised to have coffee together next month. That connection didn't cure his condition, but it soothed his fears. And for Thomas, that was part of healing. When we begin to live again, we don't need something new. We only need to look at the familiar, through eyes that no longer turn away. The same old wooden chair, the same cup of tea, the same legs, now slower, yes, but still yours. And instead of sadness, we begin to see every second we are allowed to live in this body is a gift. Dear friend, you don't have to prove anything anymore. You don't need to do more. Just be fully present. A balanced meal, a light stretch each morning, a phone call to an old friend, a book you've been meaning to finish. These are the ways we return, not to live as we once did, but to live more deeply, more clearly, and more completely. If you've ever looked back on life, not with regret, but with quiet gratitude, please leave a comment beneath this video. I'm still here and I'm living in my own new way. Because light doesn't only come from ahead, it also lives in the old familiar things when we pause long enough to see them through new eyes. I live and others will see it. That afternoon, Mr. Raymond tidied up his old tea corner. No fancy setup, just a warm glass of water, a small calendar marked with his blood pressure log, and the book he was halfway through, Slow Living in a Fast World. His granddaughter, 8 years old, sat nearby on the sofa, watching him for a while. Then she asked, "Grandpa, why do you sit here every morning without turning on the TV?" He didn't answer right away. He simply smiled and gently patted the seat beside him. She walked over, sat down. Together they looked out the window, where the afternoon sun cast soft shadows across the bougainvillea vines. No one said a word, but in that quiet moment, something real was passed on. A rhythm of peace, a presence, full and still. A silent message that said, you don't need to rush. Living is knowing you're alive. Mrs. Eleanor no longer scribbled notes on scattered sticky pads. She now used a small notebook, its cover decorated with wild daisies, hand-drawn by her granddaughter. Each morning, she jotted down a few simple things. Slept well. It's sunny today. Tried a new mustard green soup recipe. No one asked her to do it, but one day her daughter picked it up by chance, and her eyes welled up, not because of the words, but because of the way her mother still chose to be present, gently, intentionally, with grace. A mother still teaching, not through advice, but through the quiet art of living. Thomas continued his daily walks, but lately he had a companion, George, his old friend from the phone call weeks before. Neither led the other. They simply walked, sometimes in silence, sometimes laughing, and sometimes just listening to the sound of their own footsteps along the damp trail after rain. One morning, Thomas's grandson, Liam, stood at the door, watching him leave, then quietly reached for his own shoes. No one told him to. No one encouraged him. But somehow, he felt the way his grandfather lived. To pass something on doesn't require writing a book. It doesn't even require teaching. To pass something on is simply waking up each day and choosing to be kind to your own body. It's pausing, taking a deep breath, and knowing, this breath means I'm still here. It's in every small thing done with care, not to be praised, but because that's how we honor life itself. Dear friend, if you've walked through every part of this journey and you're still here, still listening, we know you don't need a blessing. You don't need a call to action. All you need is a quiet space to realize you're still a light to someone, even if no one says it aloud. If this part touched something in you, please leave a comment. I don't need to say much. I just need to live truthfully. Because quiet kindness, wholehearted presence, and the courage to keep living, these are the most sacred gifts our generation can leave behind. Thank you for being here, for walking alongside us. If this video brought even a moment of light or warmth to your day, we invite you to share it with someone you love, not to change them, but to remind them that somewhere in this world, there are still people living slowly, deeply, and fully, each and every day. A life message for our dear elder friend. Have you ever sat in stillness, watching the sunlight stream through the window, and quietly wondered, how far have I come, and what remains in the years ahead? Growing older doesn't take away your worth. It simply invites you to live more deeply, to live without rushing, not to prove anything, but simply to be fully present in every moment that remains. Perhaps your hands no longer feel as steady. Perhaps your memory sometimes drifts. But your kindness, your wisdom, and the quiet light within you remain untouched. Each morning you still wake up, still brush your hair, still pour yourself a cup of tea, is a gentle reminder to the world. I am still here, and I can still live beautifully. You don't need to do anything grand, just a smile, a phone call, a single gentle step each day. Because it is in those quiet acts that your light continues, reaching your children, your grandchildren, and the generations to come. You don't need to speak loudly, just live, slowly, clearly, kindly. And that alone is enough for the world to know. Elders are still the ones who carry the most beautiful values of life.